What happens when one of television's sharpest minds sits down with someone who refuses to play by the rules? In just 39 seconds, a single comment would turn a routine interview into the most shocking moment in talk show history. Jon Stewart had seen it all. Decades behind the desk, countless guests, every personality type you could imagine. He'd handled presidents, celebrities, activists, and everyone in between with that trademark wit and charm. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this particular evening. The studio audience settled into their seats. The familiar theme music faded out, and the cameras rolled. Jon flashed his signature grin as he introduced his guest for the evening. Meghan Markle walked onto the stage with an air of confidence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. The applause was polite, measured, exactly what you'd expect for a high-profile guest. "Welcome, welcome," Jon said, gesturing to the guest chair. "Thanks so much for being here." Meghan sat down, crossing her legs and adjusting her outfit with deliberate precision. "Well, I suppose I should thank you for having me, though I do hope this won't be like those other interviews." Jon's eyebrow raised slightly. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but anyone who knew his work could read it clearly. That was the first sign. "Other interviews?" he asked, keeping his tone light and conversational. "What do you mean by that?" "Oh, you know," Meghan said, waving her hand dismissively. "The ones where they ask all those predictable questions. I'm sure you're better than that. You have a reputation, after all." The audience shifted in their seats. Something felt off already, but Jon pressed forward like the professional he was. "Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence. So let's start with something straightforward. You've been in the public eye for quite some time now. How do you handle the constant attention?" Meghan leaned back in her chair, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Constant attention? That's putting it mildly, Jon. It's more like constant persecution. But I wouldn't expect someone in your position to understand that." Jon blinked. The smile on his face remained, but there was a new tension in his shoulders. "Someone in my position?" "You know what I mean," Meghan continued, her voice taking on an edge. "You've had a comfortable career, supportive networks, people who actually listen to what you have to say. Some of us haven't had it quite so easy." The audience grew quieter. This wasn't the playful banter they'd come to expect from Jon's show. This was something else entirely. "I think a lot of people would argue that anyone sitting in that chair has had some degree of privilege," Jon said carefully, choosing his words with the precision of someone who knew exactly how quickly things could spiral. "But I'm genuinely interested in hearing your perspective." "Privilege?" Meghan's voice rose. Slightly. "That's rich coming from you. You sit here, night after night, making jokes about everyone else's lives while you're protected behind this desk. You have no idea what it's like to actually struggle." Jon's expression shifted. The warmth that usually radiated from him began to cool. "I'm not sure I follow. Are we talking about your specific struggles or making assumptions about my life?" "I'm talking about the fact that people like you get to comment on people like me without any real understanding," Meghan shot back. "You reduce complex situations down to punchlines. You trivialize real pain for entertainment." "Hold on," Jon said, his voice firmer now. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. This show has always been about having real conversations, sometimes through humor, sometimes not. But I've never claimed to know everyone's experience." Meghan laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Oh, please, don't give me that false modesty routine. You know exactly what you do. You build your entire career on tearing other people down." The audience was dead silent now. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Jon leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his face serious. "I'm going to stop you right there. I have tremendous respect for what you've been through, the challenges you've faced. But you don't get to come onto this show and tell me what my career has been about. You don't know me." "I know enough," Meghan said coldly. "I know that you're just another person who thinks they have the right to judge how others live their lives. another voice adding to the noise. That's not what this is, Jon replied, his patience visibly wearing thin. I invited you here for a conversation, an actual dialogue. But if you came here just to attack me personally, then maybe we should reconsider how we're spending this time. Meghan's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me? Are you seriously going to sit there and threaten me on your own show? I'm not threatening anyone, Jon said, his voice steady but hard. I'm trying to have a conversation with you like I would with any guest, but that requires a basic level of respect, which, frankly, I'm not feeling right now. Respect? Meghan scoffed. You want to talk about respect? How about the respect I'm owed as someone who's been through more than you could possibly imagine? How about the respect of not being treated like I'm just another celebrity here to dance for your audience? Jon took a deep breath. Nobody is asking you to dance. Nobody is asking you to be anything other than yourself. But being yourself doesn't give you license to come in here and attack me for doing my job. Your job, Meghan repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. Your job is to make money off other people's suffering. Your job is to sit in your ivory tower and pass judgment. That's enough, Jon said, and there was a finality to his words that made everyone sit up straighter. I have given you every opportunity to have a real conversation. I've been patient. I've been respectful. But I will not sit here and be lectured about my career by someone who clearly has no interest in an actual exchange of ideas. Oh, here we go, Meghan said, rolling her eyes. The big man can't handle a little criticism. How predictable. Jon stood up. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that several audience members gasped. He looked directly at Meghan, his expression unreadable. This interview is over. Meghan's eyes widened. Excuse me? You heard me, Jon said calmly. This interview is over. I'm not going to continue this conversation when you've made it clear you're not interested in having one. You can't just end an interview, Meghan protested, her voice rising. I was invited here. I have things to say. And you've said them, Jon replied. You've made your feelings about me and this show abundantly clear. But this is my show, and I decide when an interview isn't working. And this one isn't working. Meghan stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is unbelievable. You invite me here, you provoke me with your questions, and then you have the audacity to kick me off? I didn't provoke you with anything, Jon said, his voice rising now to match hers. I asked you standard questions. Normal questions. The kind of questions I ask every single guest who sits in that chair. You're the one who came in here with an agenda. An agenda? Meghan's voice was shrill now. My agenda is to speak my truth, something you clearly can't handle. Speaking your truth doesn't mean attacking someone who's trying to have a conversation with you, Jon fired back. There's a difference between honesty and hostility, and you crossed that line about 5 minutes into this interview. The audience sat frozen, watching this escalate in real time. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. I have been nothing but honest, Meghan insisted. If you can't handle honesty, that's your problem, not mine. Honesty? Jon's laugh was sharp and humorless. You haven't been honest. You've been combative from the moment you sat down. Every question I asked, you twisted into some kind of personal attack. Every attempt at conversation, you shut down with insults. Because your questions were insulting, Meghan shot back. You treated me like I was just another guest, like I was nobody special. Jon's expression changed then. Something shifted in his face, a mixture of disbelief and understanding. That's what this is about? You expected special treatment? I expected respect, Meghan corrected, but her voice wavered slightly. Respect is earned through mutual courtesy, Jon said quietly. And you've shown none of that tonight. Not to me, not to this show, and frankly, not to yourself. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but Jon held up his hand. No, I'm done. This conversation is over. You need to leave. You're actually serious, Meghan said, and for the First time, there was uncertainty in her voice. Completely serious, Jon confirmed. I've never done this before in all my years of hosting. But I've also never had a guest come on and treat me in this show with such blatant disrespect. So yes, I'm asking you to leave. This is outrageous, Meghan said, but she was already backing away from the chair. You're going to regret this. Maybe, Jon said. But right now, I regret inviting you in the first place. Please go. Meghan stood there for another long moment, her face a mask of barely contained fury. The cameras captured every second of her internal struggle, the way her hands clenched at her sides, the way her jaw tightened. Fine, she finally spat out. I don't need this. I don't need you. I don't need any of this. She turned on her heel and started walking toward the exit. But then she stopped, turning back one more time. You know what your problem is, Jon? I'm sure you're going to tell me, Jon said, his arms crossed over his chest. Your problem is that you think you're untouchable. You think you can say whatever you want, do whatever you want, and everyone will just go along with it. But some of us see through it. Some of us know what you really are. Jon didn't respond immediately. He just looked at her, his expression tired now more than angry. And what am I exactly? You're a coward, Meghan said. You hide behind jokes and clever words, but you're just as afraid as everyone else. Maybe more so. The silence that followed was deafening. Jon walked around the desk slowly, deliberately, until he was standing just a few feet from Meghan. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. I'm going to say this once, and then I want you to leave. I have spent my entire career trying to speak truth to power. I have fought for causes I believe in. I have used this platform to shine light on injustice wherever I could find it. I am many things, but a coward is not one of them. And the fact that you would come here, to my show, accept my invitation, and then throw that word at me, tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Meghan's face paled slightly. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Jon interrupted. You meant every word. And that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But you're not entitled to this stage. Not entitled to this platform. And you're certainly not entitled to my time. So please, for the last time, leave. Meghan looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, at the crew members watching from the shadows. For a brief moment, she seemed to realize the magnitude of what had just happened, the bridge she had just burned. This isn't over, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Jon said firmly. It is. And with that, Meghan Markle walked off the stage. Her footsteps echoed in the silent studio, each one sounding louder than the last. The side door opened, closed, and she was gone. Jon stood there for a moment, his shoulders sagging slightly. Then he turned back to the audience, and slowly his expression softened. Well, he said, running a hand through his hair. That was unexpected. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. Jon walked back to his desk and sat down, looking directly into the camera. I want to apologize to all of you watching at home. That was not the show we planned tonight. That was not the conversation I hoped to have. But sometimes things don't go according to plan, and all you can do is handle them as best you can. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I believe in giving people a platform to speak. I believe in having difficult conversations. But I also believe in basic respect. I believe in coming to a conversation with good faith. And when those things are missing, when someone uses an invitation as an opportunity to attack rather than engage, then there's no conversation to be had. The audience was listening intently now, hanging on every word. I've interviewed thousands of people over the years, Jon continued. Politicians I've disagreed with, celebrities I've criticized in the past, people from all walks of life with all kinds of viewpoints. And we've managed to have productive conversations because there was mutual respect. There was a willingness to listen, to engage, to actually talk to each other, rather than at each other. He leaned back in his chair, looking tired, but resolute. What you just saw wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. And I'm too old and too tired to pretend otherwise. So I did something I've never done before. And honestly, I hope I never have to do it again. The audience began to applaud. It started slowly, just a few people, but it built quickly into a standing ovation. Jon looked surprised, genuinely touched by the response. He stood up, acknowledging them with a small wave. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for sticking with us through that. I know it was uncomfortable. Believe me, it was uncomfortable up here too." He glanced toward the exit where Meghan had departed, then back to the audience. You know, the thing about live television is that you can't take anything back. What happens, happens. And all you can do is move forward with integrity. The cameras continued to roll as Jon composed himself. "We're going to take a quick break," he said to the viewers at home. "When we come back, we'll try to salvage what's left of this show. Maybe tell some jokes. Maybe just sit here and process what we all just witnessed. I don't know yet." He smiled then, a real smile, the kind that reminded everyone why they loved watching him in the first place. "But we'll figure it out together. That's what we do here. We figure it out." As the show cut to commercial, the audience remained standing, still applauding. Jon waved them down, thanking them again, but the energy in the room had shifted. What had started as a disaster had somehow transformed into something else. A moment of authenticity. A reminder that even in the polished world of television, real human moments could break through. The crew members approached Jon during the break, checking on him, making sure he was okay. He assured them he was fine, just surprised by how quickly things had escalated. Nobody had seen it coming. The producers had vetted the guest, prepared questions, done everything they normally did, but sometimes you just couldn't predict human behavior. When the show came back from commercial, Jon looked into the camera with a weary but honest expression. "So that happened," he said simply. The audience laughed, a release of tension that had been building since Meghan walked off. "I'm not going to spend the rest of the show talking about it," Jon said. "I'm not going to analyze it or justify it or explain it any further. What you saw is what happened. Make of it what you will." He shuffled some papers on his desk, a familiar gesture that signaled a return to normalcy. "Instead, let's talk about literally anything else. Because honestly, I could use a palate cleanser right about now." More laughter from the audience. Jon's ability to diffuse tension with humor, even in the most awkward situations, was part of what made him so beloved. "We've got a great musical guest coming up later," he said, getting back into hosting mode. "And I promise you, I will not kick them off the show, unless they really, really deserve it." The audience roared with laughter, and just like that, the show found its rhythm again. But everyone knew that what had just happened would be the thing people remembered. Not the jokes that came after, not the musical performance, but that moment when a host stood up for himself and his show. In the control room, the director was already fielding calls from network executives. The footage of the confrontation was being replayed, analyzed, dissected. But down on the stage, Jon was simply doing what he did best: connecting with his audience, being real with them, showing them that even in the most surreal situations, you could maintain your dignity. The rest of the show went smoothly, almost suspiciously so. Jon delivered his monologue jokes with his usual timing. He interviewed the remaining guest with grace and warmth, perhaps even more so than usual, as if to prove that what happened with Meghan was an aberration, not the norm. But throughout it all, there was an undercurrent of electricity in the air. Everyone in that studio, from the audience members to the camera operators, had witnessed something unprecedented. They had seen a line drawn, a boundary established, a moment where enough was enough. As the show wound down and Jon delivered his closing remarks, he looked straight into the camera one last time. "Thanks for watching tonight. he said. I know it was a weird one, but life is weird sometimes. All we can do is handle it with as much grace and honesty as we can muster. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I believe in dialogue. I believe in giving people chances to be heard. But I also believe that dialogue requires two people actually trying to communicate, not one person attacking and the other defending. So tonight, we drew a line, and I stand by that decision. The audience applauded one final time as the credits began to roll. Jon waved goodbye, the theme music played, and the show was over. But in truth, the conversation about what happened had only just begun. Backstage, Jon sat in his dressing room, finally alone with his thoughts. The adrenaline of the confrontation was starting to wear off, replaced by a strange mixture of emotions. Regret that it had happened. Relief that it was over. Uncertainty about whether he'd handled it correctly. His phone was already blowing up with messages. Colleagues offering support. Friends checking in. Media outlets requesting comments. But Jon ignored them all for the moment. He needed time to process, to understand what had just occurred. The thing was, he had meant every word he said. He did believe in respect. He did believe in good faith conversation. And when those things were absent, when someone came onto his stage with the sole purpose of tearing him down, he couldn't just sit there and take it. He had a responsibility to himself, to his show, to his audience. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His producer stuck her head in. You okay? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Yeah, Jon said, and he meant it. Yeah, I'm okay. That was crazy, but I'm okay. For what it's worth, she said, I think you handled it perfectly. Nobody could have done better. Jon smiled gratefully. Thanks. I'm not sure about perfectly, but I did the best I could in the moment. She nodded and left him alone again. Jon sat there for a while longer, letting the events of the evening settle in his mind. Eventually, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and prepared to head home. Tomorrow, the world would have opinions about what happened. Critics would analyze his every word. Supporters would defend him, detractors would attack him. But tonight, he had done what he thought was right. He had stood up for himself and his show. He had drawn a line and held it. And sometimes, that was all you could do. The studio lights dimmed as Jon walked out into the night, leaving behind the stage where television history had just been made.